2, increasing human safety, and 3, improved monetary value. By legalizing prostitution, we do not mean legalized street walking. We are calling for a well-regulated, standardized, safe brothel system. As it stands now, street prostitutes face a great danger. According to an article written by Locke, Gaze, and Fairley, prostitutes overwhelmingly work outside of the law. This has implications for their health that are hard to quantify. In one Australian study carried out in 1998, the prevalence of sexually transmitted bacterial infections was 80 times greater in 63 illegal street prostitutes than in 753 of their legal brothel counterparts. Occupational health and safety law is applied to prostitutes in lawful brothels but not to their counterparts on the street. Fewer risks of being infected with STDs means fewer STDs for our society as a whole. It is impossible to successfully keep illegal prostitutes on the street clean and safe from STDs. Allowing prostitutes to continue working after having contracted an STD would not happen in a regulated brothel system. The evidence to support this claim lies in the policies already being practiced at brothels, such as Sherry's Ranch in Nevada. There they have rules and regulations for how an individual is to procure employment. First off, the women who work here must obtain a license for independent contracting. They work a minimum of 1 week and can work up to 3 weeks. They then must take a week off. From the Sherry's Ranch job application, you will need to be tested for STDs and HIV. Sherry's Ranch has its own designated medical facility where all the tests will be performed. Results will be sent directly to Sherry's Ranch management the next day. These tests being done on site make it easier to get results and are an incredible convenience for the important factor of safety. As it stands now, prostitution is easier to get into than it is to leave. Many things could force one into prostitution, such as poverty or sex trafficking. How is it possible to leave if you have a pimp who is dangerous and refuses to let you go? Sex slavery is real, even in the United States. Prostitution regulation and legalization would ensure that every step is voluntary. You can start at any time, you can quit at any time. Background checks would be mandatory in order to ensure that minors cannot be employed. A prostitute would easily leave to find another job should they choose to do so. Through regulation and legalization, the safety of prostitutes would also increase in relation to violence. According to Carrie Liderson, the Center for Impact Research study showed that 21.4% of women working as escorts have been raped 10 times or more, with comparable rates for other types of sex work. Meanwhile, the rapes, beatings, and other abuses male and female sex workers suffer are rarely prosecuted. The fact that over a fifth of the women in this business have been raped over 10 times is deplorable. The fact that it rarely leads to prosecution is even worse. Prostitution would be improved and safer if it was regulated. Many workers in brothels report that they feel safer due to the protection of employers and co-workers. Rape statistics would undoubtedly be lower if prostitution was just a phone call away inside of the brothel. Our policy could save our tax dollars. A great deal of money is spent trying to control prostitution currently. According to Joseph McNamara, the former police chief of Kansas City, Missouri, trying to stop prostitution by criminal law has proven to be an enormous failure that has led to corruption. It has led to violence, and it certainly has not lessened prostitution, but probably made it much less profitable. In terms of the philosophy of a free society of America, it is wrong on that basis. And secondly, when you look at the pragmatic parts of it, it is unenforceable. And thirdly, it's an enormous misuse of scarce police resources, where we have women and children in danger from violent serial sex criminals and killers. That is what we should be concentrating on, not on how many arrests we can make for prostitution. Legalization and regulation would ensure police forces being able to save their time for problems that actually matter. On top of that, each sex worker in Nevada last year was estimated to have contributed around $20,000 in federal income tax. That could come back to a community that doesn't even have to feature the brothel. For example, Sherry's Ranch is located 60 miles outside of Las Vegas, ensuring that the business is done outside of the main urban environment. Our policy inspires personal gain for prostitutes. Prostitutes do not have a base salary to fall back on. Financial uncertainty does not promote the idea of getting out of prostitution. If prostitution were legalized and regulated, the only cycle being perpetuated would be one of free choice. According to Andrew Weisberg, an individual working for a Nevada brothel just 1 week per month has an average annual income of nearly $100,000. Having the right amount of money would ensure that the prostitutes only have to work here if they wanted to, not because they have to. Now, all this information, of course, begs the question of value. If prostitution was legalized, would you be okay with your child becoming a prostitute? This is a flawed question. This assumes that the legalization would be the reason for a person becoming a prostitute. Who's to say that someone who wants to be one won't become one just because it's illegal? Most parents would want their children to have as much freedom of choice as possible in life. Personally, I'll cut off there. Personally, if my child chose this path, I would prefer that they have the safest conditions possible. This would only be possible under our policy claim, that prostitution would be improved and safer due to regulation. Thank you.
All right, please stand for questioning. No, both stand. Yeah, you stay where you are. Can you move in just, oh, you're good. All right, when y'all ready.
Okay, so you talked about the fiscal benefits of prostitution. I have here, it says the value of the fiscal evasion in this field is appreciated to be very high. Do you know the costs of implementing these regulations?
I do not know the cost per se. I only know the cost that they're taking right now.
And also you said that law enforcement would have more time to focus on other things. Do you not think a lot of their time would be spent enforcing these regulations, going to brothels, visiting them, making sure they're following all the laws?
I do not. I think that in most things that are regulated by the government, I think that they have their own agencies and workers that they can send out to regulate this stuff. As far as security goes, within the brothels, they can have their own security teams if they wish to hire and enforce whatever. And if need be, then they can call an officer or two down if they have a problem.
Okay, and a case in Western Australia in the 70s, the containment policy was faulted for encouraging police corruption, including demands for sex exchange for not arresting sex workers. They had problems with surrounding areas where prostitution wasn't legal. There were brothels that they were allowing and letting slip under the table. Do you think this type of corruption could happen if we legalized here?
I do not. I believe that if it's regulated correctly and that they have standards that they are supposed to follow, and if they're followed correctly, take for example like the food industry. It's very well regulated. If you miss one part of it at all, if anything comes back like contaminated or anything like that, then you're basically shut down. As long as it's enforced well and consistently, then we should have a problem.
Okay. Back to the fiscal responsibilities. I have here financial benefits. It's a quote from Zahiri and Dirshu in the economic value of prostitution. Financial benefits that might be obtained by permissive regulation of prostitution are not ethically sound. Do you agree with this?
I do not. Ethically speaking, I know that there's an argument made that perhaps spending money on a prostitute is similar to buying a person. You're buying them for like a certain hour or something like that. I believe that it is not the same. It's viewed as a service, much like an electrician or getting a massage or anything like that. You're buying their service for a certain amount of time. What they choose to do as a consenting adult shouldn't have anything to do with morals.
Okay, and I also have a quote here from an actual sex worker in Sweden where it is legal. She said that due to this, she has encountered increased risk of violence, police scrutiny, and discrimination because of her job, difficulty finding housing, and reluctancy from clients to help report crimes. Do you think that some people may be discriminated against if they're forced to register as a prostitute?
I think they're already discriminated against if anybody knows that they are a prostitute.
But the law would have...
Hey, that's time.
Thank you.
All right, when you're ready.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable judge, worthy opponents, we the negative accept the definitions of the resolution. However, we the negative are unable to accept the contentions put forward by the affirmative. Prostitution should not be legalized, and we the negative will now refute. The article titled "The Economic Value of Prostitution" opens the reader's eyes to the social crisis in Romania, where there are 40,000 persons practicing prostitution. They have an average of 2 to 4 clients a day, working 5 days a week and 11 months a year. When you do the math, which isn't my strong suit, that means that over 6,600,000 sexual solicited encounters happen in 365 days. As of this morning at 7 a.m., the population of Romania was 19,880,376. The population of the United States is a whopping 322,199,734. With a little more math and a stretch of the imagination, you could predict that prostitution decriminalization would mean 648,276 Americans practicing. That totals 106,965,575 sexual transactions. If numbers aren't for you, you can visualize this. More Americans would practice prostitution than the entire population of Vermont. In the article Legalizing Prostitution, Weitzer creates the oppression model, which centers not only on vice and sin, but instead on subordination of women and children. He holds the same 2 disadvantages as we the negative. 1, prostitution inherently oppresses women. 2, legalization would make the situation far worse than it is in present. To support the first claim, the degradation of women has always been a main argument against decriminalization because the majority of the population view prostitution as violence and abuse, according to regulating prostitution. Women have been striving for years for equality and respect in society. If we were to allow the legal selling of human beings, 10 steps backwards would be taken for all members. Children and future generations will have different views of women, and our moral compass here in the West will degrade. Weitzer also makes the argument that legalization would make the situation far worse than it is at present. This applies to many different areas of discussion. However, an important subject to touch on is human trafficking. Relating back to our math problem, another issue that Romania famously struggles with is human trafficking. In the perfectly titled article, "Does Legalization Increase Human Trafficking?" they support their argument with the fact that many authors believe that trafficking is caused by prostitution, and combating prostitution with the law would reduce trafficking. While prostitution may seem like a progressive and socially acceptable trade, human slavery is not far down that slippery slope. In the remainder of the debate, the negative will refute the affirmative's unethical ideas of prostitution. Thank you.
Please stand for questions.
Alright. You ready? Alright, let's talk about the last point that you make about women and trafficking. We have a report from Barbara V. Brins in 2014 where she says, "Our research, we found no evidence of trafficking in legal brothels." Like looking at Sherry's Ranch and things like that, which we've outlined in our speech, why does this necessitate like human trafficking happening?
In other areas where prostitution has been legal for longer, such as Sweden, Romania, things like this degrade. They get worse. There are people that are sucked into, underground forms of prostitution. There are dangerous ways of getting sucked into human trafficking.
Alright, then let's look at Romania, because you make an argument about the economic value of prostitution in Romania. Why should we look at this Romanian, like their model of legalizing prostitution rather than like Sherry's Ranch or like an American version of it?
We don't have to. We can look at Mexico. They also said the value of fiscal evasion in this field is appreciated to be very high. The majority of person in the practice of this occupation independently avoid to comply with the legal regime applicable or comply only partially.
Yes, but even then, like Mexico is still more corrupt than us, and like they still have like a lot more corrupt policemen. Why does that
Do
necessitate
you have
like
anything
America?
to back that up?
I don't have any evidence, but like why should we look at other countries rather than America?
Because we can't look at America because it's only happened in small areas of America. We can look where it's happened on large societal platforms.
Alright, you make this argument about like prostitution increases and the more people are going to like use prostitutes. How do we know like how many people are using prostitutes now when it's not legalized or like documented? Because Sherry's Ranch uses like documents of like looking at who's coming in, who's coming out. How do we know how many people are using prostitutes now?
Well, that was only numbers for Romania. I was only stipulating, I was not making real facts about numbers. So we can't know until something like that happens here, and because we only have such a small scale with the Bucking Ranch, it's more responsible for us to look on the larger level, to see how it affects the whole society,
Alright,
not just the
let's
city.
talk about this women's focus. You said that people will look differently at women's bodies. Why not like looking at men or like men who are in sex working? Like why cannot women use like prostitutes too?
Definitely, men can be victimized by prostitution as well. It's not a victimless crime. Think how you grow up viewing women or men. It may be less when you see them selling
But doesn't that
themselves
put them
for
on the
money.
same level then, if they could both be part of the like legalization of prostitution, and then it's for everyone's rights?
So everybody's degraded.
Alright, then how, like what do women look like in a world post like prostitution legalization? What's the difference from now when women are already still in like illegal prostitution and like violence is enacted upon them?
I actually have an instance of that. Here's another point. Women that are prostitutes, because of the unusual age curve of prostitutes plateauing around 30 or 40, it's only a temporary economic fix, and they normally find themselves unemployed and uneducated by the age of 40.
Let's talk.
Good?
Mhm.
Okay, so for my negative attack, I would first like to address the lack of moral and oppression that was talked about in the constructive speech. So prostitution oppresses women, and not only does it oppress them, but it kind of dehumanizes them, and by legalizing that will only make the situation worse. It's proven that the women that go into the business in the first place have some sort of like situation or unwanted circumstance that leads them to do that, and then they feel trapped in it. So by legalizing it, they would even be more like stuck in their situation. Another thing to touch on the regulation, you quoted in your speech that prostitution is unenforceable. So I have a quote from Bajornis, and it says, the action measures to combat the spread of venereal infections of the 10th of April introduced police authorization of prostitutes. And then it says that it ended up being reappealed because no improvement was seen. So it's already proven that this has been tested and that in the long run there's no real sign of improvement, especially with STDs. So it in fact would not end up making it a safer and more like a better practice for these women to be working in, because over time there's really no way to continually enforce every single brothel and every single secret thing going on that's already unlawful. You also said that Mexico is more corrupt than the United States, and there is really no way to be proving that in this argument because that is not applicable. Okay, so it also, back to the health issue, it says legalization cannot eliminate criminalizing sexual exposure, like the 25 arrests for HIV exposure and the 24 for aggravated prostitution. So even though the situation would be legalized, the people, like you wouldn't be able to be in the room while it's happening, and the aggravated prostitution is something that is really a really bad thing that's been happening, because that's just the prostitute doesn't want to do anything anymore, and then the person paying for their service just kind of forces them into it. And that's something that would not be able to be regulated in the moment. It's something that could be affected after the situation, but the harm would have already been done. And then finally, prostitution cannot be contained. Back to the situation in Australia, after it was legalized, it was unable to contain the industry to designated regions, so the situation would just get back out of hand again. Thank you.
So, I had just a couple of questions from,
Can you move in a little bit?
oh,
You're good.
so this is questions one. So, for me, whenever you're talking about your Australian study, when was that actually conducted?
The quote is from 2012.
But the Australian study that was used in your, the constructive speech,
Constructive speech.
and yeah,
The mid-1960s.
1970s. So do you believe that police and more law enforcement things have improved since the 70s?
Honestly, no, because you already see the police brutality that's been going on in our world today, and that's such a big issue. So I feel like, if anything, the situations would only be more corrupt, because police officers are already using their powers in ways that aren't the correct way to be using them. So I feel like that would apply here too, especially with it being in the sex industry.
But with the technology that we've gained over the years, especially things like webcam, things like video monitoring on police suits, basically, they're self cameras. Don't you think that that would be another way to help prostitutes and keep them well regulated and keep them safer if there was always a camera around? We're never alone, basically, when you think about it. Somebody always has a camera now. Whereas in the 70s, things were different. There's a lot of violence towards that.
In the moment, it would not be better. There may be some positive reinforcement from that after, but especially with all the underground things that would be going on, because once things are legalized, there's still going to be the illegal activity going on. Like, I have a quote in here that says that that the women working really had no, like, they did not want to be a part of anything legalized. Like, the ones that are already in the business So they would still be conducting their like underground and illegal services anyway.
Right. And do you believe that with legalization, wouldn't that give them a way out of getting from their underground areas of using prostitution?
No, because these women are already in such bad circumstances with violent pimps and other like violent customers that they feel as though there's no way for them to get out at the moment with their situation.
Right. I understand that. But what I was asking is, like from here up, so if we were to legalize it today, so say there was somebody who was in an economic problem, or if they had no pimp, or if they chose this lifestyle just like any person would choose to do any sort of job, wouldn't it be better to have them in a safer environment that was well regulated with legislature, with tax forms, with things that were government funded rather than illegally, like you're saying, and supervised?
Because of there'd be a whole new group of people going through the situation if it became legalized, then I'm saying that the ones that are still working in the underground would be receiving more violence and more corruption than they already are experiencing now. So while there are some instances where things could be going better, that it's going to be getting worse for those who are already in the bad situations, and those are the ones that everyone really needs to be focusing on because they're the ones who are getting all the pain and like the emotional trauma from going through all of that.
This time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I agree.
Okay. So, 3, 2, 1, 3. All right. So, the first point I'd like to address from the affirmative attack is where you bring up the numbers from Romania, talking about the massive number of people who are purchasing sex, and then you stipulate on the numbers of how it would be in America if it were legalized there. My first point there is that even though they're paying for it, then that's way more people than that are probably having sex anyway. So, to me, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, to me myself. And then when you look at the numbers and you go to the legalization, yeah, they're purchasing it and they're ordering it. And it's being practiced already, like illegally, and the numbers there we don't have a steady research bed for. Like we don't know exactly how bad it's going on there, and if it is going on, how often it's happening. And then when you look at for containment, where you were asking about that, whether it's the containment of spread of STDs, like you brought up, or containment of the brothels themselves, like we said in ours, the Sherry's Ranch is off in its own little area, and yes, I can kind of see where you're coming from when you bring up the fact that there could be smaller brothels that are being spread out in the nearby communities where, they're thinking, hey, that's a good idea, maybe we should have our own here that we're not supposed to. And that is where, yes, law enforcement would have to step in and regulate that, but I would point your attention towards the legalization of marijuana, how there are dispensaries where it is allowed to be sold there, but you still have drug dealers down the street, and cops go bust those guys all the time. It's a thing that happens, and it's something that still has to be dealt with, even though that legalization is becoming a thing there. So you can expect that sort of behavior initially, and then hopefully it'll start to go down as it has in the legalized marijuana cases. And then I would like to look at the safety of the prostitutes from a human trafficking standpoint, and the physical violences and things like that. I think we have a source on that here. First of all, yes, in human trafficking, they're often kidnapped and forced into it in other ways like that, or maybe they end up in a bad situation, like you said, and they just feel like they have no other option to get out of it. But the first thing here in the source, Kushwant Singh, he wrote that beatings, that beatings and other things like that, they are rarely prosecuted. However, in like an organized, regulated brothel, there are security staff on hand, help is right down the hall, and things like that, when they occur, even if they do occur, are quickly handled on site. Police are called out if they need to be, and first and foremost, legalized prostitution, because they have to sign a contract and they have to go through the whole hiring process. You can quit. If you get tired of doing it, you decide, I don't want to do this with my life anymore, you can leave.
And then as far as the spreading of STDs and things like that, they do have regulations. They have, I think it's weekly health checks at Children's Ranch, and they're tested for STDs and HIV, and they have a designated on-site medical facility where all the tests will be performed, and the results are sent directly to the management of the facility the next day. And then you questioned the morals of such a thing, and as I believe Jared who brought up that when it's two consenting adults and you're doing what you have to do to make money, and if it's something that whether you enjoy doing it or you understand that sometimes you got to do what you got to do, for lack of a better term, you can't bring your morals into it if you have no other option. And whether you have no other option or not, and it's the best way to do it, and it's your choice as a rational consenting adult to go about your business how you see fit.
We stand for questioning.
Okay, is this good seeing here?
No, you need to move in. All right, you're good.
Okay, so my first question is, how would every practice be efficiently regulated? Because you talked about looking at the regulated brothels, but what about the ones that are the underground?
The underground brothels, well, they're run underground, and it's normally run by a criminal organization or something similar like that. So obviously, they're not going to have their own regulations because they're just trying to make money. So they're not going to take as good a care of people as when you go into a regulated brothel. That's where they have, like, they are required by staff, by their contract that they are hired under, to get checked out medically if they want to continue working there, if they want to continue making money. They have to get checked out and pass those STD tests. And sorry, and different agencies actually run the legal brothels than those who would run the illegal ones, which keep it shut down, even if they are more formal than your typical like underground brothel.
Okay, and then how much would all of that cost to go through and regulate every prostitute, every person working there? Would you test every customer that comes in?
Well, as far as the customer process, I don't know how that fully pans out. But for it's the general cost of an STI test, and I'm sure they have some form of insurance for that for the people on staff there. And they do. And then the regulations are more so. It's typically a rule set. Here's the answer to that. Oh, sweet. And first of all, the common use is mandatory. There are placards placed in every room as a reminder to be safe and sanitary. And a physician comes by once a week to give all the girls a health screening before any activity takes place behind closed doors. The males go through a quick visual screening. And they say everyone that's asked maintains that there's yet to be an instance of sexually transmitted disease tied to legalized prostitution since the industry kicked off in Nevada 42 years ago. And that's from Dylan Love in 2013.
And then who would be paying for this? Would this be coming out of our tax dollars, or is this government funded, or?
Well, part of it, I'm sure the girls, either the girls themselves pay for it, or it's paid for by, their boss, kind of like a medical insurance sort of thing. And then if our tax dollars do, go towards it, it's better that than a ton of them being arrested for it, and we're having to pay for all of their upkeep rather than just a few medical bills.
And then by legalizing prostitution, do you think this would create more young girls to go into this field instead of, because it's an easier way to make money than, getting an education or getting a real job?
Absolutely not. They actually specify when they talk about hiring that it's a good job thing for students because it's a flexible schedule, all that good stuff, and you have to be, I believe it's 21 before you even attempt to do it. So I don't think it would be.
And what
That's
about
time.
time?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
That's good?
Mhm.
Okay. For my defense, what the things I want to clarify here and make more prevalent, when we're talking about legalizing prostitution, we're talking about the structured, very regulated on the streets. We're not talking about people who are still being run by pimps. In the hopes of legalizing prostitution, the same way of legalizing marijuana or legalizing alcohol, the whole goal is to get those negative parts of prostitution to be bankrupt. If there are legal ways for people to go purchase their sex act or purchase their alcohol or purchase their marijuana, the whole goal behind legalizing it is to make people feel more comfortable doing it that way than getting it from the illegal source, putting them at risk. Also, whenever we're talking about how this reduces STDs and what the regulation is now and how it's flawed and how it will continue to be flawed, the main problem that I see here, police. I have a quote here from a police officer in New York. It says, "Police may confiscate condoms during street arrests, sometimes used as evidence, but often more as harassment." So by using legalized brothels and having everybody using safe sex practices as answered in the questions, condoms are mandatory in the brothel system. There has been no instance of any sexually transmitted diseases in the legalized system of prostitution in the brothels in Nevada for the last 42 years. That's a huge amount of years. That is actually longer than in Australia, the study that y'all brought up. Also, they get tested for STDs every freaking week, so it's a big deal. That's a lot of money that is being spent, but I'd rather them spend it on them getting tested than spending it on their life. That little cost getting the test and figuring out if you have it and you don't, or if you have it and you do, you stop prostituting. You're not allowed to anymore. But if we don't take that little time to take the little test, then we're going to have to, as a government, pay for their STDs, or they're going to have to find a way to find their STD medications, and that's going to force them to go into an unsafe way, which then they will be arrested and then they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Also, the safety, you were saying that people are forced into prostitution based off of negative effects in their life. I would like to say that there's a lot of people who do a lot of things because, of course, that's just what they want to do. I don't think anybody is forced into doing drugs. I don't think anybody is forced into being a stripper. I don't think people are forced into being porn stars. I think they choose to make that life choice, and I think with their choice, they should still be allowed to have freedom of that choice, but only in a regulated way. Spending our tax dollars to regulate such acts of prostitution, like I said, is more beneficial than the negatives, which we're seeing right now on the streets. It is said that it costs, we have a statistic here from the local jailing system, it costs $2,000 to keep a day to arrest a prostitute. So that's just from arresting them, taking them and holding them, and then letting them go, because they also can't be held for longer than a day. So if they keep getting arrested, it costs the state or the city $2,000 each time. It says cities spend on average $7.5 million on prostitute law enforcement, with budgets ranging from $1 million to $23 million. And it concluded that keeping prostitution illegal costs taxpayers significantly more than legalizing it. Also, like you're asking, who's going to, if it's an easier way to make money, won't more women want to do it? Well, I don't believe that's actually the case. You do earn a lot of money, but by the time you're 21, a lot of people have been in college and are about to graduate, and they can go on and earn money with their degree or choose another way. As long as it's legal and safe, there should be no problem with it. Let's see here. It is said, like we said in our opening statement, that the annual income from working at a Nevada brothel just one time, or 1 week per month, their average annual income is nearly $100,000, and $20,000 of that goes into federal income tax. So if you just add that up with your prostitutes that are now legalized, $20,000 for each, that will cover all of the costs of keeping them safe. And I think that's the most important thing. That's it.
All right, first to talk about your analogy for marijuana and how
say from personal experience that in Washington, where it is legal, where I used to live, they don't do that at all. It happens never, because once again, for the same reason that he said about prostitution, it costs a lot of money to go do a raid or a bust on someone who is barely dealing anything, whenever it's still legal for anyone else to have anyways. So it costs more than what they're going to make off of it. Second, you're still only speaking of the people who are going to go the legal route. You've mentioned multiple times that these are people who are coming from lower incomes, who have very little money and need to go into a job that's easy to do, easy to make a decent amount of money on. Those are also the same people that are going to be now forced to have to pay for licensing fees, checkups, medical bills, just to become legal. So, from a tattooist standpoint, because I am a certified tattooist, it costs a lot of money just to go through those classes. So they're going to now have to do that exact same thing, but they don't have the money. So they're still forced to go the illegal route at a very minimum until they can afford to go the legal route. The other problem is that you stated that it costs $2,000 just to arrest a prostitute for one day. And that's literally only one day, and then they're still able to go back out and do it again. So now imagine if they go and break down or bust down a whole illegal brothel. You're going to cost the state or just the county, which generally doesn't have as much money as the state, $10,000, $20,000 to stop something that's illegal, and then they're going to still be able to go right back and do it again. And they all still have their clients, so even if you were to close off the actual building, they still have their contacts, and it can still continue to happen. Next, you mentioned visual screening. That's not really a very good way to check if someone has AIDS or anything like that. So, using condoms, if everybody were to use, let's say hypothetically, everybody were to use condoms, and 100% of the time, it's been proven that condoms do not always stop STDs. So, in the case that you do have someone who has HIV or AIDS, now has the potential to still pass that on. And if you're tested, let's say hypothetically, every week, and that were to happen 2 days after someone were to have been tested, you now have another 4 to 5 days before they're being tested again, that HIV or AIDS, hepatitis, whatever, is being spread to everybody else, or possibly everybody else, if the condom doesn't work. Condoms bust all the time, same concept. Now, you've also mentioned that your bosses are going to do what they can to make sure everybody's abiding by this regulation. But on top, so now you're saying that these people who are choosing to go the legal route have a boss, so they're technically not in control of their own body. And their bosses are more than likely going to be fueled by the attempts of trying to make money. So it's obvious, it happens every day, that bosses do and disregard other people's rights in order to make more profit. You've also said that if there's a legal way, that people are going to feel more comfortable following that route because they're not going to have as much risk. But I think you're forgetting the fact that it's going to be much easier to go the illegal route. And that's been a common term for a long time, that you're going to take the path of least resistance. And it's going to be a lot less resistant not having to go through different hoops just so you can become licensed or certified to be a prostitute in the first place, which is, once again, going to cost money out of your own pocket. You use the bunny ranch and all that as an example, but there's a thing called sampling error for polling.
go over the case and then just line by line on answering what he said. Is everyone ready? Alright. There are 3 reasons why you're going to vote for legalizing prostitution. First is a reduction of STDs. As Jared has said in his opening speech, that the use of condoms and the fact that there's always another person in the room with you when doing things like BDSM or other extreme acts of sexual, like, sex, there's someone else in the room with you. There's someone else watching. They always have cameras. They have bodyguards down the hallways. There's reasons why that they're going to enforce things like condoms. Even visual screenings that happen at Bunny Ranch now are going to be changed post-legalization. There's things like blood tests that can be enacted and that people have to pay. Maybe people have to pay for those to get to use prostitutes and be part of this brothel. But those customers will front load the cost. Next is this human safety. In the status quo, prostitution is much worse than legalization of prostitution. People, violence is enacted upon bodies of women every day. People are held under the grips of pimps. Things in legalization of prostitution, people can quit their job anytime. They have at max working a week or 3 weeks, and then after that they can quit and never come back, or they can just quit at all because it's a job. They have labor rights. Because when they talk about other countries, and they talk about Mexico and Romania and stuff, those don't have the same labor rights that the U.S. does. Post-legalization, we instill those legal rights. Aaron Fucus in 2013 says that sex workers in all countries of the region except New Zealand and the state of New South Wales and Australia lack the labor rights afforded to other workers, including the legal right to a safe and healthy workplace. This is the reason why you can't look at their Australia stuff that they might bring up in the last speech, or even Romania or Mexico, who have different labor rights. The third reason you're going to look at this is the revenue. First is the tax. Even the cost of legalization might be large, but once the people once brothels are taxed and once we can make those brothels, we'll make that money back. Also, the way that we can have that money now is that police or tax money towards police, busting down legalization is right now. Texas says that $2,000 per each prostitute that's busted and put in jail. Yes. But that money can go towards, instead of just busting those people, going towards paying for the infrastructure and the tests that happen. Second is that women themselves can make money off this and get themselves out of lower poverty rates. He makes an argument about people in lower poverty rates are going to have to pay for the test and pay to have to get certified. Brothels can always front load that for you, and once you sign up for it, the brothel, there's a regulation that can be instilled in the legalization that says that brothels have to pay for those tests, or that taxpayer money to pay for those tests. We can always cover that cost for those people, and then they can raise themselves out of poverty. Those are the 3 reasons we're going to vote for legalizing prostitution. Now, on the line by line, he says that police don't bust it because it still costs a lot of money. Our argument is that taxpayer money is used in worse situations for criminalized prostitution rather than legalized prostitution. We can flip the script and use that taxpayer money used now to bust them for legalized prostitution. He says that they have to pay for fees for checkups to be legal. I've already answered that above. Brothels front load the cost, or taxpayer money answers that. They say busting down an illegal brothel costs a lot of money to stop this. Our argument is that legalization makes tax money and it stops that cost. It allows us to front load the cost for them. They say visual screening doesn't stop AIDS. Increased legalization makes tests more likely, more regular, and makes them better than the status quo, more than just visual tests. Things all condom use, continual, people watching you, making sure that it's all safe and regulated. Then he says that they're not in control of their own body because they have a boss. This is where our case comes in, because we have made an argument throughout the entire debate that they can quit at any time they want. At max, they have a 3-week time when they have to work, and any in that time they can break the contract and just walk away and quit. It's like any other job. If I go apply for Whataburger and then I don't like the job, I can just quit and walk away. He says it's much easier to go the illegal route, but when you look at marijuana legalization, it's much easier to walk down the street to any dispensary than have to go through hoops to go find a drug dealer and then possibly get pulled over for some traffic violation and then be searched and then arrested. There's much more harm in looking towards the illegal route, and also they always have you've seen in the shows where cops are posing as prostitutes and then they catch the person when they hand them the money. There's always reasons why the legal route is much safer for people, and they'll go about that. This is reasons why you vote for a legalization of prostitution. Thank you.
they both fall under the ethical line, and they both say that prostitution supports the oppression of women, as well as it will make the situation far worse. The main point of our argument is ethical. While they may have some points about economics and safety, there still is no answer to the ethical dilemma at hand. Mike Huckabee, he's a Democratic candidate. During one of the debates, he said that he did not advocate for the legalization of weed because it confused children about the idea of drugs. If we legalize prostitution, it will in fact confuse our children. It will give them mixed signals about sex, things that are okay, jobs and career paths that are okay. A point that he brought up about if you get an STD, you're no longer allowed to practice, seems like a dangerous career choice for me. If condoms don't always work and you get an STD, you no longer have a job. So, and also when he said it costs $2,000 a day to arrest a prostitute, I think the better step instead of legalizing prostitution is maybe making the punishment worse than 1 day, and people won't do it as much. Another thing, they keep wanting to talk about regulating and all of the brothels. However, it's going to happen illegally anyways. Instead of putting money and efforts into promoting it and legalizing it and making it easier to do, we should put money into making the regulations harder and getting rid of prostitution altogether. One of the points that they misunderstood, they said that we said people were forced into prostitution. I have a quote here by Schaefer and Bavarian that says, working in the gray economy is often the only real choice for women. This article goes on to talk about how the economic status of women and the area that they're in highly influences their choices to do prostitution. It's not that they're forced by someone else, it's that they're forced by economic needs. I have another quote here from Between Emotional Politics and Biased Practices. Despite the decriminalization and obligatory tax registration, the state has continued to view sex selling services as a social problem. This isn't just an economic issue. This isn't just a legislative issue. This is an issue with the morals of our Western society.